Hey folks, Mel the Train Tutor back in the studio and back with another rock painting tutorial for you. We're restarting the realistic rock series while I work on the book because I've got to do rocks for the book, so I thought I'd share it. So I'd also thought I'd take an attempt to try a new style of filming and see if we can polishing it up. Couple of little hiccups, but it's really good looking at it, to be perfectly honest. So we're cracking on. Now, the first rock technique we're going to be tackling is stylized wargaming rocks. These are the least realistic rocks of the realistic rock series. They're not really realistic at all, to be honest. But it's a great way to use a simple few colours of greys, brown and a cream, and some simple techniques of base coating, overbrushing and dry brushing to get some really good wargaming rocks that look good on the tabletop at eye length. They may not be realistic, but it's a great starter technique to get you stuck in. So let's get stuck in. Come on, let's get cracked on. Before we jump into the technique, guys, remember, if you are subscribed, unless you ring that bell and get notifications, you've only actually got a 16% chance or a 1 in 8 chance of actually seeing my videos in your feed. So ring that bell. And if you are going to give this technique a go, remember there's a link down below to the Terrainiacs group. It's 19,000 strong now, so jump in the group on Facebook and post your stuff on there, or post it on normal social media and tag me in it at the Terrain Tutor on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. And finally, if you really like the vids, remember there's links to patrons and PayPal down below. It all helps keep the lights on, the cameras rolling and me bringing these techniques for you. So, shall we jump into it? Come on. We're going to be using this Woodland Scenics mould to cast up the rock face we're going to be painting. First job is to level it off, and for that I'm using a damp rag just to keep it relatively level. Next up, it's time to mix our casting powder, and for that I'm using Crystal R. This is a casting powder used for making industrial moulds. It's incredibly strong, and it's mixed 2 parts powder to 1 part water. Once it's poured into the moulds and slightly levelled off, I give the table a good bang to loosen out any air bubbles. Now, you can use a vibration table and you can pre-soak the moulds in wet water, which is water with dish detergent to stop the bubbles, but I just find this way quicker. After about 10 minutes, it's ready to demould, and it's strong enough to come out as a single piece with no worries. Next job is to clean it up a little, removing any of the little flash bits from where it's overspilled the mould lines. And then finally picking out any air bubbles I didn't manage to bang out of it. And there you have it, the perfect rock mould for us to crack on with painting. So come on, let's get cracked on. Now, for our stylized wargaming rocks, we're going to start off with a mid-grey in house paint. And I'm going to slightly water it down and then apply it over the entire surface, pushing it into the recesses because I need it to get absolutely everywhere. And once that's done and you've got a complete coat over it, it's time to leave it to dry. Don't worry about any small bits showing up on the top really ridges. They'll get covered at a later stage. Now that our grey base coat is dried, you can see that it's got a good even coverage, but there's occasional spots where, particularly on the particular high bits, it hasn't really taken. Don't worry about that, they'll get covered at a later stage. The next thing is we need to give a bit of definition. This is stylized terrain, so it doesn't need to look realistic, it just needs to look good on the tabletop. So I've got a mid-brown, nutmeg spice from Wilkinson's, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to brush it into the recesses. Rubbing it around, it's going to get messy, that's perfectly okay, but I'm looking for all the recesses. I'm just looking to get this brown into them. Keep going until you reckon you've got a pretty good coverage of all the sort of recessed areas, and then all we need to do will be leave it to dry. Now that it's all brushed in, it's in various sort of thicknesses, but I've got it in all the recesses. Let's leave it to dry and then we're going to come back and start making it pretty. So our contrast brown has dried, and as you can see, it's a bit messy, but it's time to start cleaning it up and making it look a little bit more realistic. So what I've got is, I've got the mid grey we started with, and then I've got my highlight grey, which is a touch of silver from Wilkinson's, and it's about 2-to-1 ratio, and I'm just going to give those a quick mix. Now I've mixed and highlighted the grey, it's time to apply it. And for that, we're going to use overbrushing, which means taking the paint, taking most of the paint off the brush, a bit like dry brushing, but not to the same extent. And then simply come along and starting at the top, dry brush down. It will appear very much lighter because wet paint is always lighter when it's wet, but it will dry darker. Keep dry brushing down, avoiding the recesses as much as possible so that weathering stays in the recesses for your contrast. Any large areas of brown can be broken up with a little bit of stippling. Now that overcoat has gone on, we're starting to get contrast between the greys, and we've broken the brown up to a far more realistic look of weathering, which will be really good when looked at tabletop level. Next off, all we need to do is leave it to dry. Now that our mid-tone overbrush grey coat has dried, it's really starting to bring out the detail, but it's still a bit monotone on the grey, so we need to break it up and highlight it up. And for this, we're going to be dry brushing. First off, we're going to use our original touch of silver, which we used to highlight up the grey for the mid-tone. And we're pushing it onto cardboard, trying to take the majority of it off the brush. Keep going until there's next to nothing coming off the brush, and then go over to the piece and start at the top, only brush down. This will break the surface up and make it look a little bit more realistic and a little bit more interesting to look at table's eye length. And that's how just a simple highlight of a single light grey can break it up and make it look more realistic. Finally, we need to add a little bit more colour in there, so I'm going with a light cream beige colour. Once again, we're dry brushing, and I'm doing this before that is completely dried, so it'll blend in a little. So coming down, and this will just help break it up and make it look a little bit more natural. Go lighter than your first dry brush so it doesn't overpower anything, and if it does, give it a quick wipe with your finger. And now it's all dry, there you have it. As I said, the stylized technique is very basic and it's not that realistic, but it does produce really good results really easily, just using a simple collection of 4 paints, house paints, and a few techniques: base coating, overbrushing and dry brushing. So it's the perfect starter, and it's the perfect technique for getting a rock effect on a large area of rocks, such as a gaming board, especially if they're rocks with good recesses where the brown can recess in and you can get that contrast. Right, let's wrap this up. So that's it for this technique, guys. Remember, if you're after more rock techniques, you'll find them in the Hills, Rocks and Cliffs playlists on the screen right now. And if you really like the channel, then you can also subscribe or support it on Patreon for extra benefits. And in the meantime, guys, let me know in the comments what rocks you'd like me to cover in future videos, and I'll get cracked on with those. And I'll see you soon. All the best, yeah? Ta-da!